The Royals departed the winter meetings last week without making much news, but that's typically been the case for the organization. What the Royals tend to do at this function is plant the seed for moves that'll be made over the next few weeks. On today's SportsBeat KC, presented by Big O Tires, Royals beat writer Lynn Worthy, columnist Sam Mellinger, and Vahe Gregorian join me, Blair Kirchhoff, in breaking down the winter meetings and what may lie ahead for the Royals. It's Tuesday, December 17th. Here's Lynn, Sam, Vahe, and me talking some hot stove baseball. Lynn, there's snow outside. I'm thinking there was not snow outside last week in San Diego.
No, I missed it if it was.
Did you get outside? People think that when these baseball meetings are in exotic places that you just basically play on the beach all day. And
I got outside, probably for dinner on most of the nights. There's one where I just literally stayed in the hotel, and then the last day I was there, there was actually a KC barbecue place right across the street from the hotel.
Famous KC barbecue
yes, exactly.
place.
It's I guess the owners are from Kansas City, and also it's some scenes from Top Gun were filmed there.
Yep,
so
for sure.
I made it there, I think, the very last day I was in town. But
I've seen a picture tweeted from that Kansas City barbecue restaurant that has the Kansas City Star, like sports covers in it.
It did at one time. I don't know if it does anymore, but it did. And on a future podcast, maybe I'll talk about the time that I had dinner there with Bob Frederick and Haskell Monroe, former Missouri president, and we watched a KU-MU basketball game from Kansas City Barbecue.
Was that the last time a KU athletic director and Missouri president, chancellor, ate together? Had
to have been. And it wasn't arranged for a story. It was just, where are we going to go to dinner? There was at NCAA meetings back in the 90s. So, back when things like that could happen. Don't happen much anymore. So, but the baseball winter meetings were there, and the Royals were not the most active of teams at the winter meeting. But I think we've come to know that that's the case with the Royals. They just historically haven't done much at the winter meetings, but there has been some signings and some other movement since then. Let's start with the news of the day. The Royals actually made some news today with a signing of Braden Shipley.
Yeah, former first-round pick of the Diamondbacks in 2013, debuted in the majors in 2016. He really hasn't pitched that much in the majors, that is. 24 games, and I believe the number was 12 or 14 starts, somewhere in that neighborhood. Again, in my mind, it's another one of those reclamation projects where it's a guy who, hasn't done a whole lot, but they're looking for some upside and low cost. I mean, it's pretty much got Royals written all over it. It's one of those guys that's just, it's what you expect. But they look for guys that, where if you hit it big, nobody expected it, and if he doesn't hit, you're not really losing that much. And they need pitching. They need pitching anywhere they can find it. So, this offseason, they added Trevor Rosenthal. They added Shipley. They took the kid
Stephen Woods Jr.
Steve Woods Jr.
Rule 5.
Rule 5. So, none of them is going to really move the needle. But, if you hit on one of those, maybe it's a guy that you is part of something down the line. And, again, not costing you much.
I was intrigued by Trevor Rosenthal just because of the flash that he showed with the Cardinals. I can't tell you what the stretch was, but tell you for a while he was about as good as there was in baseball.
Yeah, I want to say it was 13, 14. I can't remember if it was 13, 14, 14, 15, but he was an all-star one of those years. Saved 40 games. It was under Matheny, who was, I think, was a big part of him coming to the Royals because he'd been to Matheny's house since the end of this past season, and the Royals tried to get him last offseason when he originally signed with, I believe it was the Nationals, and then he was released in the middle of the season, and they tried to get him again. And I want to actually to go back to Nationals. I think the price was a little high, so they weren't really in contention there because I think the Nationals gave him like $7-8 million, something like that. When he got released, they wanted to try and get him again, and then Detroit got him because I think the Royals wouldn't guarantee that he'd be in the majors. So he went to Detroit, and then he ended up the season with the Yankees in AAA.
And as a bonus, he's from here. He's a Kansas, at least Summit, I think.
At least Summit, yep.
I'm just looking at it here. He had 93 saves in 14 and 15, and still, what is this? 435 strikeouts and 325 career innings. So he's got it. Hasn't done squat since 2017.
Yeah, he had Tommy John,
but yeah.
And so last year was the first year back from Tommy John, and the control was all over the place. I mean, he's still throwing, average 98 if I remember right.
Yeah.
But it was just the walks. It was, that first year back, the command wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so they're banking on that the second year,
Yeah.
He'll find that and still have the velocity, and they could, pull something out of him.
That's how it often goes. 26 walks in 15 innings last year, but they say the longer you get it going, the better feel you have.
Real late bloomer from a prospect standpoint. He wasn't a kid who was like a big prospect out of high school, but grew stronger, grew taller and stronger, and put a lot of zip on his fastball. So it'd be great if it works out. If the local kid makes good.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. The Royals have certainly tried a number of these reclamation projects as pitchers. I feel like the only guy that stands out to me right now, and maybe I'm just not thinking of three guys, but it was Ryan Madsen.
Chris Young.
And Chris Young, to some degree, right? Yeah, for some period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best one that they've ever had, at least with this front office, might be Joakim Soria. He
was a Rule 5
Rule
originally.
5, yeah. I think he had not pitched above A ball. Rule 5 is different than what we're talking about here. But, Brad Keller, another Rule 5 that's done well.
Good,
yeah, I mean,
good
as
call.
far as those signings, I think, trying to remember, I think Dayton might even have mentioned it, like that Chris Young might have been one of the best ones that they've had as far as just those sort of, I think they use the value signings, or, they use that term. And, yeah, I mean, and you say Rule 5, that was the one thing about the Woods kid where I was just sort of like, I don't know. He hasn't pitched above A ball yet. I mean, I think they like, the velocity and the curveball. They really like the curveball, but hasn't pitched above A ball, so we'll see. But maybe they get a Keller-like deal out of him. They think he could relieve and start potentially. So
yeah, they're good moves. If you make 10 of these moves and 2 of them work out, then that's great.
Yeah,
there's no risk.
Yeah, the risk. It's like, what are you risking? I mean, they made some room on that 40-man roster so they could make some picks. I think they pretty much knew they're only going to make one pick because the Rule 5 this year, just everybody, the sense was that the pool wasn't that great. So, I mean, like, they had the 4th pick, so you probably got to pick somebody with that one, use that one, take a flyer on somebody. But after that, there wasn't a whole lot.
Yeah.
At least it wasn't viewed as there's a whole lot there, but you're not losing anything to take a shot.
They squeezed every drop out of Chris Young, didn't they? They got every last productive inning that was in his body in the 2015 postseason.
And then kept paying him.
Continued to pay him.
After that, yeah.
Well, as a gesture, I think.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, all in all, it was worth it.
That's right. But the winter meetings in the last few weeks did not necessarily produce a lot of movement for the Royals in terms of their roster. But there were some interesting stories from San Diego and in that time frame. Lynn, I thought the idea of Ryan O'Hearn taking over first base and wanting to give him every opportunity for it sounds like one of those 500 at bat type of seasons for Ryan O'Hearn coming up. Let's just see if he can just grab the position and that and also Matheny talking about Merrifield, the versatility of Merrifield and Dozier, and what that might mean for the lineup, and what that flexibility gives. I don't know if if it's something that you say now and you get to spring training and you see Merrifield at one position for most of the time, but at least those were some topics that came out of the spring.
And I don't know how. And I'd asked this question. I don't know how realistic it is to think that Dozier and Merrifield are going to move around all season, like be everyday guys without, set positions. But I definitely do believe it's something that they're at least thinking about right now. I mean, you mean November, December, you can think about a whole lot of things. Doesn't mean it's going to play out that way, but I think it's something they're considering, and Dayton even went as far as to say they're going to look at options at third base because they feel like they may be able to sign somebody, make a good deal there, and use Dozier as an outfielder more. So, I mean, I think they'll look at these things. I just don't know like I couldn't tell you right now that for sure we're going to see those guys move around all season. I feel like that's doubtful, but I think early in the season for sure, like, that first 40 games they like to talk about, like coming out of spring training, if they're still not sure about some things, I think there'll be some moving parts for sure.
It's an interesting question for them to be saying all that at the time they're declaring O'Hearn, going to get him to 500 at bats basically, or however you want to look at, give him every chance, simply because it seems like first would be one of the places Dozier would also fit if you're talking about mass movements. You're really just saying Dozier's going to play some in the outfield and at third, if you're buying into that.
Well, there's so many people, when you stop and think about that, they might take a look at first base because O'Hearn, they want to give him every shot. They feel like he's, a big-time hitter that they could be in the middle of that lineup, left-handed guy. But McBroom, who they picked up late last season, who didn't really show the power they did in the minors, but in the minors he put up big numbers, and this wasn't Pacific Coast League. This was, in the International League. So he'll get a look at first base, or at least he'll be in the mix at first base. If you try to talk about Dozier, possibly. And then Salvi's going to move around, coming back off of Tommy John, and so he's going to be in the mix as DH and first base too. So there's a lot of people who, again, this is why there's going to be moving parts. I think definitely through those first 40 games, unless there's some moves or injuries and maybe that pool shrinks, but I think there's definitely going to be people moving around.
All of this kind of speaks to the notion of Royals 2020 as all present company included. We're not talking about anybody outside of the organization or what the Royals a piece or two that the Royals might add that would elevate their prospects. And I think that is sort of the big philosophical question that the Royals face right now is, are they playing for 2021, 2022, or are there some moves they can make that can make them competitive in 2020?
I don't know what that moves would be. What those moves would be.
Well, wouldn't it? First of all, wouldn't it involve losing the pieces that you've identified as most valuable, Merrifield or Soler or Duffy,
to win in 2020?
To have a better chance of competing in 2020.
Yeah.
At a time when the division seems to be,
that's true.
I think the Twins are going to be good again, but the Indians just dumped Corey Kluber.
Yeah. To me, I think they look at this. They wouldn't say this, right? But I think they look at this as, as 2020 is like sort of a fact-finding mission, for lack of a better way of putting it, on how they can win in 2021. And a huge part of it's going to happen in May, June, July when those kids start coming up, when Brady Singer and Jackson Cole are in that group. They're going to start, matriculating to the big leagues somewhere around there, and then they can have a better feel for, okay, is this thing going to happen quick? Can we make some moves, the winter between 20 and 21? Or is this going to be a little bit longer term thing? I mean, they're going to say we're trying to compete and, all those things, but it's hard to, the list of things that would have to go well to turn a 103-loss team, and I know they had some bright spots with Soler and Merrifield and all these other guys, but the list of things that would have to go right for a 103-loss team, especially on the pitching staff, to turn around and win 85, if you're an 85 win team, you're in it in September.
You are. You're second wild card territory.
Yeah. But it just there's a lot that has to go right for that to happen. In addition to Hunter Dozier repeating, in addition to Alex Gordon being good, assuming that happens, it's just a long list.
Yeah, this is. I mean, I can't remember what year it was, but I remember there was a year in Boston where they called it the bridge year, because they had guys that were going to be coming up, and they basically had a team full of guys who were, like, I don't want to say holding the place, but, like, they knew this team, like, okay, be decent this year until we get this new core in, or until this group, like this, the core and then the new young guys added to that is ready to, like, go forward and compete for World Series, which they did, but that term got to be such a dirty term. I remember in Boston, the bridge year, and that's in a big market.
Yeah.
That's in the big market. When it's a small market, that bridge year looks a whole lot different, and you don't want to be making labels like that on it, because it just lends itself to criticism.
Yeah, I was going to say a bridge year in Boston. What is that, like 88? 88 wins or something? Maybe a wild card spot. But I know what you're talking about, and you're right when you talk about the rebuild.
Yeah,
type
they won't use that term anymore.
No, but that's what it is essentially. Waiting on prospects to develop and get to the majors. It is different in a market the size of Boston versus Kansas City.
And as far as you had mentioned wouldn't it be, if you were making the deal, moving one of those guys? I think it really matters, though, on what you're getting back. And I don't think they find what they're looking for as far as something they get back for Whit Merrifield at this point that's going to make a big enough difference where they're going to move him. I mean, like you hear these teams that supposedly like him and or they want him. And I think it was out there at the winter meetings, somebody from the Royals used the term like, we hear that so-and-so wants him. No, they don't want him. They like him. If they wanted him, then they would do what was needed to get the deal done.
It sounds very high school. I just was thinking when you used the term bridge year, it is interesting and there's no way to know this answer, but just to think about how many guys will be on opening day 2020 roster versus how many of the same guys will be on opening day 2021. I mean, there's no way to know that. I don't even know what to think, how different it'll be 2020 from 2019. I guess it'll be 7, 8, 9, 10 different guys on the opening day roster. I'm not sure about that.
You have to go back and look at last year's opening roster because I'm trying to think. Because even then, because of the way the beginning of the season was stretched out, technically, I don't think Homer Bailey or Jorge Lopez. There's some guys who just weren't on there just because you could sort of fudge it with starting pitching. So you still had Chris Ellis, who was the Rule 5 pick, who made his major league debut last season, and then he was gone a couple of weeks later when they actually needed starters and all that sort of stuff. So that I'm sure it'd be a lot different. But when you factor those things in, guys who were sort of on the opening day roster but weren't really going to be. Actually, now that I think Jorge was because I don't think they had options on Jorge, so he was on the roster, but I think Homer wasn't. And I'm trying to remember how else they sort of finagled that to start the season. But yeah, off the top of my head, Salvi was injured. You had Chris Owings. You had Billy Hamilton. You had Nicky Lopez wasn't here. I think who else? Frank Schwindel made the team last year out of spring training. So there was,
Lucas Duda.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely going to be different. I think the big differences though, the ones that are going to make the impact over the next year or so are going to be the pitching staff. How many of those young kids? Who do they fill in with? Guys that get moved from right now where they're starters sort of out of necessity this last year to get put in the bullpen where they really should be. That's going to be the big impact ones I feel going into next year and the year after that.
All right, let's take a break here to hear from our friends from Big O Tires. And when we come back, we'll talk about a column that Sam Mellinger wrote recently about the Royals and a kind of a philosophical choice that may confront John Sherman. We'll be back right after this.
The biggest sale of the year is happening now at Big O Tires. Buy 2 tires, get 2 free on select tires in stock. That's 2 free tires when you buy an alignment and tire protection package. That's 50% off tires at Big O Tires. It's going on now, but it all ends soon. Buy 2 tires, get 2 free at all participating Big O Tires. Installation additional, plus shop fee of up to 10% of non-discounted retail price, not to exceed $35. Hurry, sale ends Monday, December 23rd.
We are back with Lynn Worthy, Vahe Gregorian, and Sam Mellinger, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. We're talking Royals. Kind of hot stovey. It is kind of hot stovey, isn't it? It's
for some teams more than others.
Right. But hey, before you know it, we'll all be at Bartle Hall at FanFest. The only question at that point will be, will the Chiefs still be in the playoff? I guess at that point, it'd be Super Bowl week for the Chiefs.
Would it?
I think it would be, right? It's always the last week in January. And
Super Bowl or disappointment week. Right. One of those two. There's no in between.
Right.
It's 100 days to opening day today.
How about them?
100 days to opening day. You better get your vacation in, Lynn.
Yeah, it's like 12 days until pitchers and catchers report.
Yeah. I was thinking about I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, well, you go home for Christmas. I'm going to be home almost till New Year's. And then it's like, okay, you come back and it seems like Fan Fest is right around the corner. And then after that, it's like, yep, get ready to go to Surprise.
And the Royals may do a lot of their signings in January.
Yeah, that's the other thing, too. Late January, February is when they're going to start signing people. And then it's,
Yep. And then it's October, and you haven't had a day off in 7 months. So, all right, Sam, I really enjoyed the column you wrote on Sunday about the Royals, and basically, I've thought about this a lot. The Oakland A's approach to roster composition versus other teams, really, in terms of market size and revenue. They're small, right? They're middle to small market.
Definitely in terms of revenue.
In success, they have been a model, really, of small market success. Not ultimate success, but in terms of fielding a competitive team just about every year, a playoff contending team in most years. And that's been the case for a couple of decades now. But to do that, it requires some sacrifice. And one of the big sacrifices is you better not. If you're an Oakland A's fan, you better not get attached to players who are good, because the A's will spin that player off and bring somebody else in, a newcomer in. So, is this a viable option for the Royals?
Well,
or something they should consider?
I think it's something that they are considering, and it's look. We don't know what John Sherman wants yet. All we've had is an introductory press conference. We won't know what he wants until the track record builds of, either the direction of the front office changing or not. But I think that if you read between the lines a little bit from that press conference, and if you talk to some people in the game, there's a feeling that, he talked about sustainability a lot, which is a great thing to talk about. But what that really means in practice is something very different than how the Royals have operated so far. And that's not good, that's not bad. It's just, it's different. And there's a logical case to be made for each approach. What the Royals have done is basically go for broke. When they were building, they made the Will Myers trade, that turned into the James Shields trade, that turned into the Wade Davis trade. They traded Greinke. I know the circumstances on that one were different because Zach wanted out. But then they trade, the pitching prospects for Johnny Cueto. They trade Sean Manaea for Ben Zobrist. These are all, the Royals were good, but they're trying to get better kind of moves. Those are go for broke moves. If your goal is sustainability, if your goal is to have a playoff contending team in more seasons than you don't, like the A's have done, I don't think you don't make those moves, And another thing that you do that the Royals didn't do is after the season of 2016, I think you trade those valuable pieces. You trade Lorenzo Cain to somebody and get back what you can. You get ahead of that rebuild to sort of, the peaks may not be as high because you don't trade for Ben Zobrist and Wade Davis and all that stuff, but hopefully the valleys aren't as low either. Because you're sort of cushioning a little bit, and I kind of like the go for broke, and maybe that's just being a sports writer, and it makes for good content. Either way, just light the match and see what happens.
100 wins or 100 losses, it's all good.
But there's something just sort of gutsier about that. I think I do think that the other way, the Oakland A's approach, is easier is not the right way, but it's less difficult than the go for broke, and I think that it's more likely to work out. But I think the go for broke, you're more likely to have a parade.
I think it would be easier to be a fan of the team that. Well, I think there's no question about it. You're easier to be the fan of the team that you can kind of pencil in at least 84, 85 victories a season, and maybe in some years you get in the low 90s. And Oakland, where the Royals were fortunate to take full advantage of their small, what now history shows us was a small window, but they took full advantage of that small window. Oakland has never taken full advantage of the large window of opportunity they've created for themselves, partly because they got it shoved up their rear ends by Justin Verlander in a deciding game in the ALDS a couple of times. In a 2-2 DS series, and they couldn't beat Verlander. If things had fallen a different way, maybe one time they break through, and they're the model of
Totally.
baseball.
Yeah, I mean they you might want to double check me, but they blew a big lead in the 8th inning of a wild card game about 5 years ago as well.
I believe you're right on that.
They've had some weird things happen. And the famous quote. I mean, Billy Beane has accomplished so much in his career, and he's a model for in a lot of ways. But my air quotes stuff don't work in the playoffs is like one of the things that would be on his career tombstone. And look, like I don't know. Sometimes there's a causation correlation issue with this. It seems logically that a team, especially in those early years, that's built basically with Zito, Hudson, and whom I forget the other one. Mark Mulder. A team like that should be pretty damn tough in the playoffs, and a team that can draw walks and get on base and maximize scoring chances like that. So, maybe it's one of those things, if you put it in a computer simulator and 1,000 times, like the A's would have won a World Series or two by now, or at least been to a World Series or two by now. Maybe it would show that the Royals just got really, really lucky that, not just that wild card game, but then the game 4 the next year in the division series. Those are lucky breaks. Maybe that's what it would prove, but that's what's happened. You can't change history.
That's the thing. That's what's happened. So if you, on balance, ask yourself, would you rather have the last 10 years of the Royals or the last 10 years of the A's, or whatever time frame, modern time frame you want to use? Wouldn't you take the last 10 years of the Royals? I would. As a fan, as a writer and a fan.
Yeah, no, I think you would. And what's funny though is it's just like a human nature thing. Maybe we're veering off topic here, but I feel like there's a very much a grass is greener, kind of thing, just with human nature. And I wonder if the percentage of people in Kansas City, there'd be a lot that would say, no, you will pry that parade away from my cold dead hands, right? But I think there's a lot of Royals fans the last couple of years, watching 207 losses, that would say, God, the A's do it, why can't we? And I'm sure there's a lot of people in Oakland, however many A's fans there are in Oakland, a huge percentage of them will say, like, we've seen this movie over and over and over again. We've never seen that parade.
Do you think?
Literally, they've seen the movie. Sorry.
It was a good movie too. I like the movie. I think it was up for an Oscar that year too, like for Best Picture, if I remember right. But I was gonna say, do you think the fact that they did win it makes it easier to maybe move towards like a Oakland sort of a thing? Like, okay, it wasn't that long ago, as opposed to when you're building the first time and it's been 30 years, that you feel like you have to do something to get this one, and then you can try and build long term after that. I mean, do you feel like that plays into it, just the emotional sort of, go for broke to get this thing because it hasn't happened since, 3 decades?
What's funny is logically what you just said, I think, makes complete sense. And this is just my perception, and you guys know this as well as I do, so tell me if you disagree, but it seems like in a lot of corners of Royals fandom, those 2 pennants in the parade did not earn this front office a ton of benefit of the doubt. It seems like there's still a lot of and look, like, they've made mistakes. I'm not saying they're even close to perfect. They've made mistakes, but I don't hear a lot of, well, we got a parade, so let's, in Dayton I trust. I hear a lot of, but then they gave Chris Young that big contract, and Alex Gordon didn't work out, and Ian Kennedy, and that's what I hear. And maybe negative is you're more likely to say that than you were if you believe in Dayton. You're less likely to reach out to the local sports writer and say, I really like Dayton and this is going to work, But that's my perception. It seems like there's a lot of people, Dayton got lucky, and this isn't going to work the second time.
I think the back-to-back, the 207 is obviously the issue here.
Yeah.
If they had gone as they did in 16 and 17, 500, and continued something like that, while they're trying to rebuild.
Yeah.
But to bottom out, to be what they were pre-Dayton, that's what disappointed me. Mm-hmm. I can remember having a conversation with you guys a few years ago, post World Series champion Royals, about how I thought they would continue to be a factor in the division because that's just the way baseball seemed to have been built. You weren't good for a small spurt of time. You were good for a long window, and you weren't not necessarily in the playoffs every year, but at least competitive most years. The Royals' window ended up being really darn short, and for a lot of reasons, right? Contracts, decisions that were made.
Yeah, but like one quick thing. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, go ahead.
But the same way they got in some ways lucky in some specific games and all that stuff. I'll always be curious what would have happened in 2016 if that foul ball in Chicago didn't happen. I mean, how many teams lose?
They took out Moose and Alex Gordon.
Yeah, how many teams lose 2 All-Stars on one? Non-play, basically. I mean, that was a incredibly bad break. And then, I think it was 2017, right? But there was a year that they had won something like 9 out of 10 and then made that move at the deadline to get like Trevor Oakes and, those guys. And at that point, look, that trade turned out to be terrible.
With the Maurer,
Brandon Maurer and Buchter, Ryan
Yes,
Buchter, I think was in that deal. It turned out to be a terrible.
Strom was one that they gave, didn't they?
Yeah,
They gave up Matt Strom
Strom.
and then a minor leaguer who's turned out to be a really good player. At least could be a really good player for the Padres. But if the trade doesn't happen, or if the trade works out, or if the year before that foul ball doesn't happen, I just that window would look a lot different, right? If they had made 3 or even 4 postseasons instead of just 2, I think it would look a little bit different. And that would take off some of the sting from 207 losses, right?
Yes, and the other thing I think about is the Royals are the only team in the division that's won a World Series, and
That's right.
Since the White Sox in 2005.
Yeah.
So I just had trust in the leadership there, and in the last 2 years, this division's been terrible. I mean, the White Sox have been terrible. The Tigers have been terrible. And the Twins have been able to take advantage of that and rise up to a level of, postseason competency. I don't think the Twins were a 101-win team last year because they were a great team. They were a 101-win team because they played in the AL Central, and they got to beat the Royals, the White Sox. I just thought the Royals, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, I thought the Royals were in a position to be that team. But decisions were, like we said, decisions were made. Yeah. And now they're at the bottom with the others.
And they're in a tough spot too because they're basically doing the same thing as the White Sox, but the White Sox are ahead of them, and in that building phase, or at least that's the way it looks. And it's just that's hard too. You want to be up when everybody else is down, and so what happens if the Royals are almost as good as they were in 13, 14, 15, but their record's not as good because, some of the other teams in the division are better. There's a lot of factors that are, in and out of your control.
Cleveland's been criticized over the last couple of years for not making the move that they haven't had to. Mm-hmm. I mean, really. I mean, not if their objective was to win the division, and it wasn't. They didn't win it last year. They were in the wild card, but if the objective was to make the postseason, playing in the Central, they didn't have to make a move.
Yeah, and that was a solid. I know they just traded Kluber, but they had pitching.
Sure, they did.
And when you have that kind of starting pitching, as long as they stay healthy, right? And that is a big, shiny, flashing asterisk. But if you have that starting pitching, it tends to be a little bit more sustainable.
It does make me wonder. I mean, in one pitcher, I don't know how to really quantify how much difference one pitcher makes, but if you had that homegrown guy in your rotation, Giordano. How much do you think over in the last couple of years, how would you quantify what difference that would have made for them? Where you look at the rotation these last couple of years, and it's just been these moving parts and getting guys in Rule 5, and paying money for some guys that you end up not getting what you hoped out of them.
That's a hell of a point. Yeah.
How about that? Yeah, we talked for half an hour and didn't bring that. Yeah. I mean, that's very significant, I think, and did as we look back on it, altered the course of the Royals.
Yeah.
So,
I will always believe. There's no way that you can ever prove or disprove it, right? But I will always believe that he was going to have a monster year.
He had one in him, didn't he? I mean, just stuff was.
Yeah.
At Game 6 in 2014.
Yeah.
He was just when he was on, man. Gosh, that guy was so good, so good. All right, guys. Hey, great talking to you. Baseball in the off season is always fun to talk about. So for Sam Mellinger, Vahe Gregorian, Lynn Worthy, thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you again soon. Links to the stories we discussed can be found in the show notes on kansascity.com and the True Blue app. Thanks to Randy Mason and Derek Donovan for producing today's episode. And hey, where you can leave a rate and review, please do that. It helps. We'll be back on Wednesday for another episode of SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City every day.